Thriving Marriage podcast. I'm Heather Cho here with our international marriage expert, Mark Johnston. How are you doing, Mark? Did you have a good Memorial Day?
Yeah, I did. It's not everything that we planned. Some people were sick, but it was nice and relaxing nonetheless.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I hope you guys all had a good Memorial Day as well. And today we're talking about S.O.S, Save My Marriage. And it's our intention to bring you guys our very best method to helping turn a relationship around. Before we get to that, though, we're going to share our client win of the week. Mark, as I'm looking at this client win, I feel like we've shared this one before. I feel like we just shared this one. So do you happen to have a client case study or just a client, testimonial that has been shared with you about someone that's been able to turn their relationship around with our process?
I'm trying to even remember if we had shared this one. I'm looking at previous weeks and whatnot, but I don't think we did share this one, but I can still share their story. So we do have, I just want to share even some other stories here, like as in we've been testing out some new methods here lately. And honestly, the feedback has been phenomenal. I was just speaking with some clients going through this beta program and getting a lot of success there. We've had one person kind of turn things around from where his wife was wanting a divorce, and now they're like talking and trying to spend time together. She's talked about going and seeing a counselor. We have another situation where there had been where the couple was separated, and the wife there really started working on things, and now he's talking about getting back together. And we have several instances of that within this group. So I'm really actually quite excited about all the feedback that we're getting at each stage of this program. Even the clients who are making a little bit slower progress are all saying, hey, I'm getting really good insights. I know exactly where I need to go. So I just want to share a win even on that front, on my own, from my own side, saying, hey, this is feeling really good to me that I'm getting such good feedback for some of our new methods and new delivery stuff.
That is awesome. And yeah, if you're just new to us and you don't know much about High Thrive Coaching, or Mark and I, we've helped thousands of couples to turn around their marriage, and we've learned a lot throughout the years, right? Yeah. And our process continues to be more and more refined. And now we've really put together this entirely new, these new phases that we've been kind of slowly introducing into the podcast about the resistance phase, how we need to do the analysis of your relationship before we start to solve problems. You don't want to just rush in and start to solve problems without knowing if those are even the right solutions, right? We need to know what the right problem is and what the right solution is in order to see success. I asked you guys here in the chat, where's your marriage at currently? If you were to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being amazing, where would you say you are? And I see some of you answering in the comments here. I'm at a 2, a 1, a 0, and you are not alone. That is exactly where most of our clients start. It's very low on that spectrum. We are the ICU for marriages, and we do help with these very extreme cases where your partner doesn't want to talk to you. They don't want to work on the marriage. They don't want to leave their affair partner. They're very unwilling, and there's a lot of resistance. And what I really love about what Mark's sharing here is that resistance is actually something that we have come to acknowledge and embrace. And there's even a reason why we actually don't want to take away your spouse's resistance at the beginning. So instead of just trying to change them and tell them to get over that resistance, we're now allowing that to be part of the process. And I think that is a big factor in why our clients are seeing accelerated results, is because we're allowing that to be part of the phase of a marriage restoring. So you guys can learn more about that in the couple of podcasts that we record the last several weeks. And of course, on the masterclasses that I run regularly. If you want to get into our next masterclass, it's happening this Wednesday. So just leave a comment saying masterclass. And this is a free training where you can learn all about this proven process. Now, Mark and I had asked in the group here, our Thriving Marriage and our 60-second plan groups, do you believe your marriage should be saved? Why or why not? And I think every comment I saw was that yes, it should be, or yes, if it's God's will, yes, because our love is genuine. He's the love of my life. He's my soulmate. The covenant is till death do us part, right? And so I love her unconditionally. And so that's what I saw, was that you guys were believing yes.
I actually want to ask you, Heather, where did the question come from? Because like my first thought is like, okay, if people are here, they're probably going to say yes.
Yeah, because I've heard some people like, I'm not sure if I want my marriage saved. I'm not sure because it's so unhealthy. It's so toxic. My partner's not willing to work on things. Maybe they're not willing to change. And so I'm not sure if I want to be in that relationship. And so, yeah, for the most part, people here are like, I want to work in a relationship. I want to save the relationship. But it's not just that you want to save the relationship, right, folks? It's that you want the relationship to be better and healthier than it was before. And so I think that's an important distinction. Instead of just saying, hey, we're going to get your marriage back to the way it was. No, that's not what we do, right, Mark? We help you get your marriage healthy, functional, and better than it was before, so the same problems don't repeat themselves. So let me know in the chat, do you guys feel like your marriage should be saved? And do you want it to be better than it was even before? Sometimes we hold on to the past like, oh, it was so great, but it can be even better than that because it may have been so great at one point, but things still deteriorated. So we want to make sure that pattern doesn't repeat itself. So my friends here, you guys have decided you want to try and save your marriage, right? Which is a huge undertaking even of itself, right? And maybe you're not really sure where to start. And maybe you've been trying a lot of different things and nothing's really been working. In fact, you may feel like you're exhausting yourself doing all these different things and nothing seems to help. So today, Mark and I are going to go over some of this process that we've used about starting the process of reconciliation, the process of healing a relationship and saving a marriage. Now, remember, this is just a high level overview. So it's some like kind of general considerations, and really the best magic for you is going to happen in the one-on-one coaching, which we're also going to talk about why it's so important to have guidance from an expert to make sure you're doing these things correctly, that you're solving the right problems in the right order, that you're avoiding some of the very common mistakes that happen out there, and that you're doing exactly what you need to do to get your relationship in the right direction. And it's a totally custom process for you.
So I'm thinking like here, like part of I think why we wanted to approach this topic today, mostly we're talking about specific considerations to have in mind as you're going about this. And I think part of the reasoning behind this was that I think a lot of times when people are like, okay, I want to save my marriage, the focus is perhaps on the wrong things. And we're trying to help avoid some of those mistakes in particular and kind of point you in the right direction. So like more so than say, here are very, very clear, specific solutions. It's more like, hey, what should you be focusing on when you have started this whole process and you are actually wanting to fix things? All right, so where do we start with this?
Yeah, so one of the really important things is to understand where you are at. Because again, one of the things we focus on here is solving problems in the right order. Mm-hmm. So, are you just weeks away from finalizing a divorce? It's like pending, right on the horizon, right? Is your spouse on the fence? Are you both still fairly invested? This is going to make a huge world of difference in how you start to approach marriage problems, right?
Yes.
A lot of this has to do with your partner's willingness to engage in the healing and to work on the relationship. So, Mark, why would this make such a big difference?
I think there are very different approaches, very different solutions, depending where you are at in the process. If your partner is hating your guts and they're like, I am absolutely pushing for divorce, I'm going to say there are solutions in those cases. There are things that can be done, but it's going to look very different than if you and your husband or wife are still living together and there's still some friendly interactions. There's just a lot of steps, or just a lot of solutions you don't even have to consider when you're at that second stage versus the first one. I think a big part of it where it makes a difference, it really affects what you can request from your partner, is one of these huge things. So if there's still a lot of friendly interaction, there's a lot more likelihood to have common goals, common interests. Even if they are pushing for divorce, like there's a lot better ability to talk about co-parenting while together, to talk about reducing tension, to having better communication. Whereas if they are really shutting down and really antagonistic, the goals are going to look very different. And what you can request from them, you're not going to be able to request more of these proactive, high level, cooperative sort of goals from them. I also think, even beyond this, it has an impact on what you can expect currently from your relationship. I see so many people go into this and say, okay, now we're going to fix things. And then there's some frustration when their partner doesn't like jump on board 100%. So very realistically looking at this, if things are further gone, you need to moderate some of those expectations, knowing that, hey, once again, there are solutions, but you have to be looking at where you're at and, like I said, moderate some of those expectations so you're not disappointed. I see so many people get into the program, they're like, okay, I'm 2 weeks into getting some help. Why isn't my wife coming back? And I'm telling them, hey, these problems have been building up for years. You need to give this a little bit more patience. And so it's good to understand that so you don't lose hope, so that you do have that motivation to keep trying. And sometimes you just need to push past that a little bit. So I also think that, like, if you go into this from the wrong point of view, if you're saying, okay, I'm expecting a whole lot right now, the potential is to push your partner away. You're saying, why can't you work with me? Why can't you do this? Why can't you consider me in all of this? Why can't we make things better? And there's like this needy energy because you're expecting a whole lot from them. It's going to backfire. So there's all these little factors that play into what kind of solutions you utilize, and how you approach your partner, just kind of based off of where you are at. I don't know. Can we think of maybe just some practical examples? I think that like this needs some illustration.
Yeah. So I don't know. The first thing that's coming to my mind is just when I'm talking to people in the master classes and here on social media, I'm seeing that they're definitely not getting this one correct, right? They're making requests from their partner that are too far from where the relationship is at. You guys may have heard me say this before, but I use kind of a medical analogy, right? If a patient has a brain tumor and they need to get an operation, but they come into a hospital and are in cardiac arrest, are the surgeons going to go operate on the brain tumor? No, they're going to get the patient stable first, get them out of cardiac arrest. And that's exactly what we help you guys do. You might be trying to operate on the brain tumor, but your marriage isn't stable enough. It isn't strong enough. And so we need to bring in some stability and build some strength in the relationship so that then it's healthy enough and has that stability. So then we can work on those deeper issues. So it's really important that you understand what requests will be acceptable to your partner right now, and which ones are only going to push them further away. We also talk a lot about our push versus pull method. So if you guys are familiar with that, leave a comment, let me know. And if you want a training on that, just leave a comment, say push, and I'll give you that free training on our push versus pull method. But that's basically like, we've got to find what's working and what's not working. And the most common mistakes that we see are like demanding your spouse work on the marriage, begging, pleading, manipulating, blaming them for everything, blaming yourself for everything, freezing, contempt. All of these are push methods, even going into a lot of, positive, I'm going to fight for my marriage and I'm going to send her all these text messages and flowers and everything. If your marriage isn't at a place where that would be received well, that's going to backfire. So Mark, I know you worked with so many couples. Do you have an example, of how two different couples, they might have wildly different actions, right? Mm-hmm. To work towards reconciliation based on where they're starting at?
So yeah, I actually just talked with someone the other day where they were starting off in the process and they're saying, hey, we've been separated for some years now. And And then this person was going over some messages that she had been sending to her husband, trying to get him to come home and talk things through. And she's like, and he won't respond to this. And I'm like, okay, let's slow this down a little bit. Why do you think that he's not responding? We had to walk through this, and we had to explain some of these very same concepts. Contrast that to another, woman I worked with recently, where she had already been working on herself a little bit, also separated from her husband, and she had already established this kind of position where there's recognition that she's made some changes. That's a very different starting position when she came to me. Mm-hmm. Because there's already recognition of changes in the relationship, there was a better ability to talk about coming back together and ending the separation. And so that's the talks in that couple right now. Even so, that conversation about ending the separation was only happening, within about a month of working together, as opposed to this other situation. I'm guessing it's going to be several months before we start having that conversation. So it's just very different, and we have to prep for those sort of big requests.
Yeah. So is this sinking in, guys? Are you understanding this? Leave a comment, let me know. And if you have any questions for Mark and I, we answer every single question and comment that we get. I'm getting tongue-tied already. Are you understanding the importance of knowing where you are at and knowing what the problems are that you're facing and what the right solutions to those problems are, and how important that is, instead of just kind of haphazardly going about things, maybe applying the wrong solution to the wrong problem, right? So we want to make sure that we are always doing that. And this really ties into that assessment phase that we have in our process here, that we know exactly where the relationship is at, and that we make sure every action that you take is ultra effective. No more backfiring, no more being ineffective. We're going to make sure every action is effective in moving your relationship forward. So awesome. Now we want to go into, now that we know where we're at, let's say we say, okay, I'm at the place right now where my spouse is not open to text messages from me. She's not open to compliments. She's not open to physical touch. She doesn't want to talk about the relationship. Say that's your starting place. Or you're like, my starting place is my spouse is willing to talk to me. We're actually kind of friends with each other, but they're saying they don't really love me because there's no romance anymore. Very different places to start, right? Let's say that we've established where you're starting, okay? The next thing that we want to do is establish and solidify basic communication and interactions wherever you are at in that. So most relationships in crisis, they're going to have some barriers to that effective communication. Mm-hmm. And this is either just a lot of coldness, distance, stonewalling, or active tension between both of you. And these we're going to handle in a different way. So Mark, walk us through what to do if you have a barrier of being, your spouse is generally very cold or very distant, compared to if there's this active tension between you.
So why we're considering this in particular, like you gave a few examples of just different problems, whether this is like a lack of romance or there's like lots of arguments. In both of these cases, or in just most cases, like you mentioned, there tends to be some problems to effective communication, being able to resolve these issues solely within the couple, between the two partners. And why this needs to be a top priority right off the beginning is there needs to be some ability to demonstrate some change. So being able to establish just some basic communication to talk about some of the changes needed, or being able to be in comfortable interactions to demonstrate something is different is very key. And I think no matter where you're at, there is some ability to build on this. As you mentioned, I do think it tends, the barriers here tend to go one of two ways, like that coldness, that distance, or it's either really cold or hot. So like that coldness or distance, it's going to be this kind of apathy towards any need to engage as a couple, or maybe that they've learned it's better to simply not engage, that things have been previously very hot, so they just back off and they just rather not do anything about it. A lot of times the mentality behind something like this, it's this idea that, well, I've tried fixing things before and it doesn't work, so why bother, why try to engage, why to put myself in this painful situation, versus like more that hot active tension usually means that the active that there are active problems that are not really being communicated or addressed properly. So here's all this high emotion and something is not, like, there's all these complaints, there's all this tension, but the real issues aren't being properly handled. I think in those cases, there's often a lot of negative assumptions going on, possibly on both sides, meaning like, here's some communication and it's being interpreted much more negatively than maybe is warranted or intended. But if you're going to, like I said, if you're going to be addressing either of these, or just communication in general, this does need to be a top priority. And I got some really good advice on this a while back, because, you know, we, within High Thrive, we had to really consider, how do we get past these communication barriers? You know, so many of our clients want to speak with their partners, and they kept saying, I kept getting all this resistance. What we've kind of come upon is, we said, okay, hey, sometimes we can't just jump into conversations, but almost always if we do things in the right order, there's a lot better ability to communicate. So first thing to start with, you can almost always build up some communication or a little bit of cooperation around that if you are focusing on eliminating points of pain. So Heather, think about this sort of situation. Let's pretend there's some tension between you and I'm saying, you know what, maybe we need to start another business, where I'm talking about something proactive like that. And I imagine that there'd probably be some hesitation. But if instead I'm like, Heather, hey, I'm noticing some tension between us, I'd really like to focus on getting rid of that. I want things to be a lot more calm between us. I mean, even this hypothetical example, that sounds easier, right? And that's what we're finding is like, okay, hey, that's a lot easier to swallow in terms of somewhere to cooperate, is if we're saying, okay, rather than all these big lofty goals, which might seem very daunting, there's a lot more cooperation, especially around these like lower levels of communication. If we're just saying, let's stop some of this ickiness between us, people are much more likely to cooperate. So you might consider, like, why is there this coldness or tension? How are you both contributing to that? And you know, if you're looking at this from those sort of angles, and generally you can get a little bit of something going on there, some little amount of interaction that allows you to snowball this a little bit more. So I don't know, can we think of some examples of just trying to simply eliminate problems, even if it's just like very basic goals? What do you think?
Yeah. So like having less tension when you are having a disagreement, definitely getting rid of disrespect. If there's a lot of name calling or inappropriate language or inappropriate behavior, shouting, anything that could be very disrespectful or demeaning, just getting rid of that is going to help reduce a lot of that tension. Right. And if there isn't maybe even that, but you guys have kids and there could be maybe a lot of co-parenting issues, right? Maybe even just limiting scheduling problems around the kids, if that's a source of tension and pain and arguments. Like, you got to look at where is that acceptable arena? Where could we start to reduce some of this tension? Where could we reduce some of this pain? And a lot of that is going to have to do with, understanding and showing respect and eliminating those behaviors that aren't serving you guys. What I really liked that you said there as well is that it's going to be much more motivating to stop those painful interactions. And even in the example that you gave there, Mark, you're still framing it as in like, hey, let's stop being disrespectful. No, it's like, hey, I really want to have respect. I really want to be able to talk about these things and have us both feel understood. So it's really framing it, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, I think, about framing it with a positive light about what we're working towards, while also stopping what's not working. I had a mentor tell me, give them no reason to rebel at this stage. Like, you don't want to give them any reason to rebel. So that has a lot to do with stopping the negative behavior and showing them what is actually wanted, and both of you listening to what is actually wanted here.
I would agree with you that the framing is important. And I know previously we've often talked about how it's much more effective to have proactive, positive goals in terms of how you're framing it. Like, what are you trying to accomplish rather than what you're not doing? And I will stand by that to some degree. I think that saying, okay, hey, I just don't want there to be any lies anymore is an example of a very terrible goal. At the same time, you know, it depends on where you are at, how much proactive sort of behavior you can ask from your partner. If you're saying, hey, I want there to be a lot of respect between us, I think that's one way to approach it. But in my mind, it does even seem slightly easier if you are framing it in terms of like what you want to eliminate. And maybe there's some need for combination of that at the beginning stages. Like, in my mind, I'm thinking it might be easier to say, hey, can we stop fighting, rather than can we like be friends? Do you get what I mean? And, and at the same time, I know there's been a big history of you and I saying, hey, don't frame your goals in negative terms or in terms of what you're stopping. I'm just also trying to consider what is more likely to be received. So maybe I need to give that a lot more thought in terms of like how to do that effectively. So essentially we're saying be positive, but not too passive, or be proactive, but not too much at these early stages. Is that what we're saying?
Right. And that is the dance, right? And so, like, if you're getting rid of the disrespect, we can just say, we'd like to talk to each other respectfully and use respectful language and a respectful tone of voice.
I guess that's maybe that's the combination. It's like, what do we want to stop, but what are we actually doing about it?
Right. Because you can't have just a vacuum of behavior, because the brain just tends to focus on actually what's not wanted rather than what is wanted. So if we're saying, hey, we want less tension, we want more understanding. We want less disrespect, let's have respect. We're not saying, hey, I want you to be my best friend and I want you to come back to me and I want you to work on our marriage, right? That would be something that would not be received well if you're on the verge of divorce. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely what you want to consider if there is a lot of this active tension and a lot of this coldness or tension as well.
Sure.
But if you do have some amount of, okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to move on to that next point myself. But like what you were saying there is, if we can get past that, is if you can really start to establish some cooperation around eliminating some of those points of pain, I think it becomes a lot easier to start gaining some more cooperation, especially around communication, by starting to build some common interests and goals. So this is where we can start to be a bit more proactive, a little bit more positive. Like, hey, I would really like to have more openness. I'd like to have more friendliness between the two of us. I'd like to have more clarity in our communication. These are a little bit higher goals, more proactive goals, more positive goals, but are only really possible, in my opinion, if you've really established that, hey, we're working towards avoiding some of the painful pieces of our relationship first. It's almost like things need to feel safer before you can start like really actually working towards building much of anything, in my opinion. What are your thoughts there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the respect and reducing that tension has to come before we're like, yeah, let's be friendly, right? Let's be friends. And it's more about creating something that's like desired by both of you at that point. What you're both wanting and what those common goals and interests are. And that's, again, so much easier to establish, if concerns and problems are seen as being addressed
Yes.
that we're not just sweeping them under the rug. We're not just blowing up. We're not just shutting down. Those are the patterns of the past. What we're really talking about here is introducing some new communication patterns that are going to serve you better because they're healthier and more functional. And they're really going to get your spouse's attention because it's going to be something different. It's a different way of approaching the way that you guys have been doing life, the way you've been talking about the kids, the way you've been talking about the divorce, the way you've been talking about whatever. And so then you're going to feel better and they're going to feel better and it's going to get their attention, which is exactly what we want to have happen here, to get them to consider the possibility of pausing on divorce, consider the possibility of pausing on the arguments, consider the possibility of working on some of these common goals with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then if there's resistance to establishing some common like proactive goals, then it generally means that there are points of pain that are still not being addressed.
Yes.
So we definitely want to make sure that we're looking at that. We always want to show that we're being proactive about these painful points and issues, and that we're slowly starting to heal the relationship, just like the medical patient, right? It's like, we got to get that patient out of cardiac arrest. That's the first step here in the communication. We've got to reduce the tension. We've got to stop the wounds. We've got to like reduce the pain. And then once it's stable enough, now we want to start to build on some common goals and create some health in the relationship.
Yes. So we go beyond that. This is, once again, like the focus on how do we build up better interactions? How do we build up better communication? If you are able to work even a little bit on some common goals and interests, then I think a lot of it from there on out is about really solidifying the trust around some of these things. In general, what I notice is that a lot of success can be seen in building trust as my clients are a little bit more proactive in setting boundaries to protect these good things about the relationship. So like at this point, there's a lot more ability to have cooperation. And the only thing that may be keeping this couple from like really communicating deeply or coming back together and having really great interactions is mostly just about comfort and trust. And so just by creating a little bit more structure around these things, like how do we create boundaries to keep out those negative parts? How do we create boundaries to protect the good pieces of the relationship? That tends to go about a lot easier once there's a little bit of, momentum going along, building up some good interactions together. And always we talk about going first, especially if you are the one that's like proposing some of these things or proposing some things that you can do to, once again, protect the good stuff and keep out the bad stuff. I think there's going to be a lot more acceptance there.
Yeah, agreed. And that brings us to our next point of how to get started to save your marriage is do not go at this alone. So many people are trying to save their relationship by themselves. And I just want you to know it's not your fault that you haven't been able to save it by yourself, because almost no one can. And that is why more and more people are ending up getting divorced. And the reason why this is problematic is because you need to have outside perspective very often in order to kind of objectively evaluate those problematic areas to really know what's going on. Let's go back to the beginning, right? We need to know where we're really at. You often can't even know where you're really at because you're just in the middle of it. You guys may have heard me say, but you can't read the label when you're inside the bottle. I've also heard it said you can't see the picture when you're inside the frame. You have to be on the outside. It takes that outside perspective to be able to see what's really going on, to read that label on the bottle, to diagnose what's going on and prescribe the right treatment plan to get you where you need to go. And relying on your own perspective is partially what led to this point of this happening in your relationship in the first place. So Mark, what do we suggest as far as people getting the right help?
Yes, I do want to illustrate that point a little bit, exactly what you were talking about. So this is what I observe within couples is, there's almost, it's almost as though like the relationship exists a little bit in a vacuum. And I don't know about other cultures, but I know in like American culture, there's not a ton of conversation about the inner workings of the relationship. A lot of people kind of present a front, like, yes, we're doing good. Here's the happy family situation. And for the most part, unless you're really, really close with people, you're not really sharing all the nitty gritty goings on in your relationship. And so what ends up happening is all these weird quirks end up forming over the years. Like, okay, maybe you tried to talk to your husband about something and he wasn't listening, so you stopped bringing things up to him, and you don't really notice this over time. And this is a lot what we're talking about, is why that outside perspective is so important, because like you said, it's so difficult to see where things are dysfunctional if you're just so used to them. It's kind of how I see it. So anyways, some suggestions you're asking about. Now, of course, we here would love to support you further in fixing your relationship. We do offer services, in case any of you aren't aware of that. But if you're not going to choose us, I do have some helpful tips, because, you know, I just recognize it's not always 100% the best fit. So I do recommend that you find someone specifically that specializes in relationship work. Can't stress this enough. There are so many people that go to like a general practitioner sort of therapist, and that's great. That's fine, you know, for many problems. My experience is that a lot of those general practitioners are seeing a different sort of base for just general problems. My expectation is that a lot of what they're seeing are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, things like that, that are really focused on the individual and making sure that they by themselves can handle a lot of the stressors in life. So if we take that set of solutions where we focus on the individual and like helping them with things, that's great. But if your objective is fixing a relationship where, you know, there are some rocky interactions with someone else, I see a lot of ineffective suggestions coming from these professionals that are really trying to help. And I don't want to disparage them, these people at all, because they're probably doing a lot of good. But when the relationship gets really complicated, I'm just going to say that the expertise isn't always there. Sometimes it is. You just want to make sure that you're finding someone who really specializes in relationships, you know, especially if they have some sort of specific training or background. I know the gold standard is, you know, within just standard therapeutic environments, is usually the Gottman method. So anyone like that has very clear specialization, look out for that. I also would say find someone who's willing to support your goals for reconciliation. Once again, if we're going to those, I've heard way too many times where the therapists hear a situation, they say, well, that's really rough. Maybe do you actually want to stay with that person? Maybe you should consider leaving. And if that's not your goal and they keep pushing you in that direction, they're not really supporting you with your goal. I can recall someone that I know in my personal life, and they were going to a counselor that was suggesting that they leave their husband. And I said, you know, I try to keep, I don't want to like cross some boundaries in my personal life and say, here's all this advice because I know about relationships. But I kind of gathered that this wasn't what this woman wanted from her relationship. And so she kept working and she kept being persistent, but she kept getting pushed to leave her husband. And, you know, they've started to turn things around a little bit. If she had just gone with that advice, you know, I was telling her, hey, you need to question this a little bit. If she had just gone with that advice, she wouldn't be in the situation that she's in now. So that's all, like, that's what I would suggest, is make sure, you know, those two things: find someone who specializes in relationships and make sure that they're going to support your goals. If you can find someone like that, I think you're probably in good hands.
I agree with both those points. It just reminds me again of kind of the medical analogy, but you guys know I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 29. And if I had just gone to like a general doctor, kind of like going to just a general therapist, would they have been able to successfully help me navigate the complexities of having such an aggressive form of hormonal cancer and being pregnant and wanting to keep my baby? That was something that was so far outside their wheelhouse because they don't deal with that every day. So what I did is exactly what we're suggesting that you do, is you go to one of the top experts in the world, like out there, that have the result that you want to have. First of all, if they're not living and breathing a fantastic, healthy, functional relationship, like I think Mark and I are, like we have great marriages. Not that we haven't had our struggles, but it's because we've had those struggles that we can stand here and say, we know that this works, right? Mm-hmm. You got to find someone that has what you want to have. You got to model their results. If they don't have healthy, functional relationships themselves, then you might want to consider not taking their advice because they don't know. It's like my daughter was asking me about acne, and I've got adult acne, and she's like, Mom, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm not the person to help you because I have not solved this yet myself. Like, you need to go to someone who's actually figured that out, right? Because results don't lie, in my opinion. And then the second thing is I went to several experts, okay, several of the top experts for cancer in the world, and many of them, in fact, all of them, save one, did not support my goals. They were telling me, Heather, you need to abort your baby. Kind of like saying, you need to just give up on your marriage. Maybe you should divorce. Maybe you should leave him, find someone that respects you. You know, if they don't support where you want to go, just like those doctors were not supportive of me keeping my baby, they were supportive of aborting her, then that would not have been in alignment. It would not help me get where I want to go. So you've got to really listen to what your own inner self is saying for you in this relationship. And most of the clients that we work with, they're like, everyone's telling me to move on. People think I'm kind of crazy or stupid for trying to stick it out so long, but there's just something in my heart. I am still in love with this woman. I want to be with them. I want my family together. I love this man. I want to know I gave my marriage everything I could. And so find someone that is in alignment with those goals. That's exactly what we do, right? You guys decide where you want to go. You tell me, I want to reconcile with my husband. I want to live my life with no regrets. I'm still in love with her. We're here to support you and help you get to that result. So that's why it's really important not to only have expert care, not try to do it yourself, and have someone that is in alignment with your goals to help you get to that result. So if you want us to read the label on your bottle to diagnose exactly what's going on in your relationship and prescribe the right treatment plan for you and give you some action steps you can take in the next 24 hours to start to turn things around, just leave a comment and say, read the label down below in the comments, and I will send you a link where you can book a free marriage analysis session with us, where we will do exactly that. All right, Mark, let's bring this all together here. Can you give us a couple examples of real people? Because I want to talk about like the real results, right? Results don't lie. Can you give us maybe one or two examples of people that were on the verge of divorce? They were like, SOS, save my marriage. I want this to work. They went through this process. They, found out exactly where they were at. You did the assessment with them. They understood, okay, this is where we are. They were able to open up and deepen some of that connection, the communication, and they got that kind of expert help and how things progressed from there.
Sure. I want to start off by saying, just in terms of like case studies or just cases that we've dealt with, we have actually recently gone over a lot of our own numbers. We're trying to gauge where most of our clients are struggling. We really value here within High Thrive, like making sure that we're offering like those top sort of services. So we're always looking at, okay, where are our clients struggling the most? How are we shoring up that little area? But, just what we talked about today in terms of building up some cooperation, some better communication, making sure that there's a very clear plan. Like, that's never where we're struggling here within High Thrive. Like, that's just about every single one of our clients is getting past those hurdles and making sure that there is better communication and interactions. And that's a good portion of the way, towards some reconciliation. But in terms of very specific examples, I'm thinking about a couple that I had worked with not too long ago. I know they were separated when they were first started to see me. Actually, it was just the wife that was seeing me at first. In their situation, this was actually their second separation, and had been separated now for at least a year on the second go around. There wasn't a whole lot of communication. He wouldn't share where he lived with his family. So you can kind of get the idea of the strain there. Now, this woman worked very hard, and luckily in their situation, there was still some desire to keep some connection. Like, so the husband really wanted to have a relationship with his children, especially, and she built on that. Now, their services, when they stopped services with me, they were both meeting with me. They were both wanting to work things out, and they were just negotiating on how to move back in together. So that, I think I stopped seeing them probably about 6 months ago or so. But like, that's where I left off. I assume everything was good at that point. But this is a very real example of where they went from like separated multiple times, separated and not communicating very well, to all coming together and actually wanting to work things out. And I could just probably describe many, many other situations like this. I'm thinking of more than one instance where the divorce was like either a week away or less, like where they just had to sign the paper and it was all done. I've seen many cases like that where the spouse calls it off at that point. They're saying, you know, I just can't go through with it. I want to put things on hold. I want to see where this can go. And, you know, as long as we start getting that cooperation, either like attending sessions or saying, hey, let's see what can happen here, that's gold right there. And that's where we can start doing a whole lot of good towards actual healing for the relationship. So I don't know, I could keep going, but
yeah, yeah, that, and we can. So yeah, leave a comment if you love what you just heard and you're happy for those couples and where you would like your marriage to be. So let's do a little recap here. The bigger perspective, right? It's really important to remember that if your marriage is in crisis, then it's likely years in the making to get to this point. Mm-hmm. And that means that to expect things to turn around instantly, you know, it's just going to result in disappointment that is going to be ineffective and it will backfire. However, quick progress can be made when both partners are involved in the healing, when they're both wanting to work on the relationship. So nearly all of our efforts with this process is helping to build to that point where you can gain full cooperation from your partner. Yes. So if you want to see how we can help you turn an unwilling spouse into someone that is willing and cooperative, wanting to work on the relationship with you, just leave a comment, say willing, and we'll get you that link to get that free marriage assessment as well. All right, let's go to our marriage myth buster. This one is, once you've communicated about something, the issue is resolved.
Mm-hmm. So we always take these sort of myths from comments, from people, things that our clients may have said. So we always see these sort of things out in the wild. And to me, this sort of statement might seem odd. The tone to me is the problem with this statement, and why I say, hey, this doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't feel like it's accurate. Meaning, to me, the statement communicates a lot more than the simple idea conveys right at first. It's not just like, hey, we've communicated something, the issue is resolved. To me, like if we're hearing that sort of thing a lot, like, why do we need to talk about this again? You know, or, you know, we've already talked about it, we already made a decision, and that's that sort of thing. It communicates to me some amount of, maybe a few possible things here. It communicates possibly some domineering sort of attitude. Once again, that idea, like, we've talked about this, we don't need to discuss it anymore. Or it's a dismissive sort of avoidant attitude, possibly like, come on, I don't want to deal with this anymore. It's not important. I don't want to have anything to do with this. So the truth is that this sort of statement would only remotely be true if communication was 100% perfect. We're talking about like something that is beyond normal humans, sort of perfect, meaning all feelings, all thoughts are very open. Nothing is held back. There's acceptance of all points of view. There's mutual understanding. Cooperation has been reached. There's very clear agreements with what's going on. And just most of the time, we don't operate like this. And in most cases, big changes require some patience, some continual conversation, lots and lots of feedback. And I think eventually you get there, but it takes all those things before issues are really resolved. And I think that the idea that you can just say, well, this is the way it needs to be, and then that's it, is awfully dismissive to the problems in general, and generally to your partner as well. So, if you're seeing this statement from your partner, if you're saying this to them, you really want to check yourself on this, because it's probably not leading to somewhere productive or positive.
I agree 100%. I love that you say we need lots of feedback, and the ability to repair and to give and receive feedback is one of the foundations for a healthy relationship. The other polar extreme, which we're not necessarily discussing today, but the other polar extreme is where we constantly talk about issues and we never actually resolve anything. So we want to make sure we're not on either of those spectrums. We want to be right in the healthy, functional place where we're able to talk about problems, create solutions, and work together as a team to get those goals met. Thank you, Mark. And thank you guys for joining us today. Next week, we're going to share with you why your spouse won't talk with you. If you have a spouse that is not willing to talk with you right now and you don't know why, then this podcast is going to be for you. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we cannot wait to see your marriage thrive.
See you, bro.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.